G'day from Australia. I'd just like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which I'm broadcasting. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. My name is Ashley Davis and welcome to my live stream. Today I'm continuing my coding live stream of when I'm building out my Kanban board extension for Visual Studio Code. This is actually the fourth session, so in a moment I'm going to show you how you can catch up on the previous three sessions if that's what you want. Today I'm going to be doing a little bit of refactoring on the tests. I'm going to be adding some TypeScript types to my my data that I've been building out while I'm testing. And then I'm going to get on and hopefully finish the rest of my TypeScript tests for the function that I've been building for my Visual Studio extension. As I'm working, I'm going to do my best to explain what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. Please feel free to ask questions in the chat. I'll try and keep an eye on that. Ask me questions to my Twitter as well. That's Ashley Davis 75. Now, for anyone wanting to follow along, this is the code repository. In one of the previous sessions, I show you how to clone this using Git. If you scroll down, there's some instructions here on how to get it running. This is what I've been developing with. I've been pushing it after each live stream so that anyone who wants to can get it straight away, or you can even try and follow along live while I'm coding. If you want to catch up on the previous episodes, go to my YouTube channel, The Data Wrangler. Click on playlists, and you can find the coding live stream taskboard playlist, and you can see the previous three sessions there. In the first session, we covered why I'm doing this, what my motivations are, what I want to get out of this, and also the other open source projects that I'm sort of building on here. So this isn't all my own work. I'm building on stuff, gluing stuff together, and making it work the way I want. In the second episode, we got set up with Jest. We did a bit of testing. In the third episode, we did some more testing. Have a look at the description on each one to see if there's anything there that you're interested in. You can see that down here. And before we get into the coding, I'm just going to show you what the prototype looks like. So before I started coding for real and doing the test-driven development for this, I prototyped this whole thing just to make sure it was feasible, to make sure it was going to work. So you can see it here. We've got a Kanban board in Visual Studio Code. On the right is the Kanban board rendered using React, and this is the what I'm using to render this is the React Trello component. So you can find that on GitHub. You can install it from NPM. It's got some great example demos. It's basically Trello. This is a Kanban board. On the left here we have a markdown file that is our to-do list, and you can see in the prototype, even though the prototype doesn't do a huge amount, you can see that I've proved that I can drag these things around. And on the left here, you can kind of see that's being updated in the markdown file. And we can open up other markdown files and we can edit them as well. But the prototype was just a prototype. There's lots of issues. There's lots of potential edge cases. Lots of failure modes that need to be tested and tried out. And one really important thing that I need to cover. Hopefully, I'll get to that in this session. If not, I'll be getting to that in the next session. Is that I need to preserve data that's in the markdown file that doesn't fit the to-do file format. So, it wouldn't do to just kind of deserialize this to the Kanban board data, edit it, and then serialize it back to Markdown, because you might actually lose user data. So that's going to make it a little bit tricky. But that's something we're going to come to maybe towards the end of this session, or possibly in the next session. So I'm just going to get out of that. I don't need this one open now. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm working in a clone of the repository that I put in the working to directory here, because I've been through a few different repos previously, but this is where I'm at the moment. I'm just going to make sure my tests from last episode still run. So I'm using Jest for testing here. We're testing TypeScript code. The function I'm actually trying to test here is the function that converts the markdown format into the Kanban board data. So you can see here I've got 4 tests that are passing. I can load an empty board. I can load a board with one column. I can load a board with a column with different data, and I can load multiple columns into my board data. Now today I've got a bunch more tests I want to add to this to really flesh out like what this converter function can do. Let's have a look at the tests that I've got. So I'm just going to open Visual Studio Code on this directory, and we'll look at the tests that I've already created. If you want to see how these tests were created, you can see the last 2 episodes. So this is the Jest tests. Hopefully everyone can see this. We've got a test here. This is the one to test that we can load an empty board. So we've got kind of the format here of what we're expecting to get back from our conversion function. We've got a function, a test here, can load a column. So what we're passing in here, what is the input to our function is a markdown AST. That's an abstract syntax tree. So this is the parsed version of the markdown file. If you want to learn more about that, you just have to see the previous sessions in this live stream, because I've covered a lot of ground already. So I'm just going to minimize that, but that's the sort of the test data, the input data we're passing in, and in this case we're expecting it to come back with board data that has lanes, which are the columns, but we're using the React Trello terminology here, so we use lanes, even though I prefer to use columns. And we're expecting that one board comes through with no tasks on it. There's no cards in that Trello board. We've got another test here, can load a column with different data. So this is the same thing, but just to make our tests relevant, we're using a different data set this time. We've got one here to test that we can load multiple columns. So this time our markdown abstract syntax tree has multiple columns in it, and we're testing here that the end result has multiple lanes in the board data. Now I've got a bit of a to-do list at the end here for the kind of tests that I want to write. You know, I like to do this before I start testing. I do a bit of planning, and I figure out like what tests I'm going to write. These are the tests for loading a board, and these will be the tests that I will hopefully start to get to at the end of this session. But if not, I'll be getting more into that in the next live stream. These are the tests to check that we can edit a board and serialize it back to the markdown file, but without losing any user data. That's where it's going to get a little bit trickier. Now the function itself, markdown to a board, it's still quite simple, but you should have seen this. This started with like one line of code on my first test, and it's grown to this. So this is what converts the markdown abstract syntax tree to board data. This is the function that we're building out through testing. It's going to get a lot more complicated yet. Now I'll just show you quickly the prototype version of this from the prototype that I showed you a moment ago. The prototype function is called markdown to board, and this is the one that wasn't tested. So this wasn't created using test-driven development. This was created using prototyping. This is the whole function here. And you can expect the function that we're creating now to get as complicated as this one. Probably more so, because there's more that it's going to do. I'm going to test more edge cases. I'm going to test more failure modes, and it's going to have a more sophisticated system of being able to kind of edit changes back to the markdown file. So I guess a question you might be asking is, why am I doing test-driven development in the first place? Well, it's really useful in this case to be able to build out a complex function. It's a function that's going to have lots of different ways of testing it. It's going to have lots of different inputs that it can have, and you know, it's really hard to test this kind of function exhaustively in a manual way. So test-driven development really comes into its own for testing complex functions like this. And again, it's not complex yet. I mean, that might look complex to you if you're fairly new at this, but it's going to get way more complicated. It's going to get like 3 or 4 times more complicated than that. I would estimate. Now with test-driven development, you know, like when you get to the end of your iterations of test-driven development, you know the code's going to work. It's been tested exhaustively. It's been tested for everything you can imagine. Obviously, it's not going to be tested for things that you can't imagine. So, I mean, there is a case here for manual testing. We still have to do manual exploratory testing just to find the things that we'd never think of that could occur. And also, you know, once I've got a body of tests around this code, I can update it. I can add features to it without fear of breaking anything. That's such an important thing to have as a developer. And also, I can refactor this code. I can refactor it to improve its design without fear, because I'm not going to break anything that I've already tested. Like, the tests are automatic. It's automatically going to pick up any problems. Now, the first thing I want to do here, actually, before I do that, I'm gonna now I want to refactor my tests a little bit here, because as you can see, I've got these big abstract syntax trees in every test, and that's a fair bit of data. I kind of want to move that out to a helper function. So it's really important to actually be able to refactor your tests as well as refactor your code. Your tests are at least as important as your normal everyday code. So I'm going to do a bit of a refactor here, and I'm going to pull these this sort of input test data out to a helper function. I'm going to start Jest in live reload mode, which I've got hooked up to npm run test watch. So that's automatically going to rerun my tests and rerun Jests whenever I change my code. Let's just make sure this starts and that nothing has failed in the meantime. Cool. So I'm operating at a starting point of having 4 passing tests. I'm going to put my code and my test runner side by side. Now this is easier to do on a desktop computer where you've got bigger screens, multiple screens. But you can do this. You can do this on a laptop, or you can have it full screen and just be switching. You know, so you can do this easily on Windows. You can switch between windows. I'm going to put them side by side so you can see what's happening. Now I'm kind of wondering here if I can just use Visual Studio Code's refactoring tools to just pull this out. If that doesn't work for me, I'm going to have to do it manually. Refactor, extract to constant, extractive function. Let's try that. Cool, I've got a new function. Let's call it make test data. I'm terrible at names, and naming is the hardest thing in software development. So where did it put that? If I go to definition or F12, it'll take me to that function. It's put it way down at the end. Do I want it there? I actually kind of think I want it. Oops. I think I want it at the top of this this code file. And I also think I want it within the test suite, just to show that is to be used by this test suite. So I'm saving that. You can see that my tests on the left there are automatically rerunning. So I'm just going to make sure that I haven't broken anything. I've still got 4 passing tests. So I'm not, at this point, I'm not adding any new tests at all. I'm just refactoring my existing tests. Now, I might just call this one make test data for empty board. Have a nice descriptive name there, so I don't even have to have a comment on that function, because I can instantly see what that's going to do. Actually, that's not an empty board, is it? This one is the empty board. So I completely got the name of that function wrong. Make test data for board with single column. And now, because I use basically the same test data in this test here, I'm going to call the same function to make the input data here, but I want to parameterize it based on the column name. So this is TypeScript code, so I'm going to type it to some extent. And I'm passing in the column name. So this is now parameterized. My tests are going to fail now because I have, I'm expecting a function here, and the TypeScript code isn't going to compile. That's a really good thing about TypeScript, is if you get your inputs wrong, your types wrong, it's going to tell you. And the good thing is it can tell you in Visual Studio as well. So I'm going to do Control-Shift-B in Visual Studio Code to compile or to build this project, and it's going to show me where the problems are. So I can double click here to actually jump straight to it and put in the name of my column, which I'll make a variable up here. Column name is to do. Pass that into my new function, and I'm going to use that same thing down here. So I'm using the column name as the ID here as well. That's going to change a bit later, but for the moment it's being used for both the title of the lane and the ID for it. I save that. Now I should, my prediction is that I'll get a passing test, and that's come back as passing. That's great. Now I can use the same, now that I've parameterized it, I can use the same bit of code down here. Except this time I've called my column blah. So I'll change that column name there. I'll get this data, remove this data here. It should be exactly the same. I can replace this ID here with column name. My tests are rerunning. I expect these tests to pass. It's a good idea to make predictions about what's going to happen. You know, is the test going to pass? Is it going to fail? How is it going to fail? These are things that you can use to kind of bolster your own experience, because, you know, when the result comes back as the same, you know you were correct. If the result come back different to what you predicted, then you know that you know you missed something, and you can use that to improve your knowledge, improve your understanding of how this all works. Okay, so we've got one more of these things I think to do. Let's just one more. Can have multiple columns. So now, what am I going to do here? Am I going to parameterize based on the columns, or am I going to parameterize based on the name? You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to change this to be make data for board with columns. So we're going to expand this to support multiple columns. I'll change this variable to column names, and I'll pass in an array of strings there. And so what we can do here is we can use the JavaScript map function to create our list of columns. If I get this right. Just to make this clearer, something's gone wrong here, but to make it clearer, let's just pull that out to a separate variable here. Call it children. Aha, there we go. I was missing parentheses maybe? Oh no, because I'm returning an object, I'll use this shortcut where I'll make it return an object. That's some pretty advanced JavaScript there. I'm gonna change this so that it's not, so you can kind of better see what's happening here without the shorthand, basically. Hopefully that makes sense. We've done a map over this array of column names. Then for each column name, we're producing a column for the test data. What am I missing? I'm missing a curly bracket. So the result there is the children that we're going to plug into our test data, which we're going to plug in here. So you can see there, you know, if you've got a bit of a problem with a big chunk of code, you know, sometimes splitting it out can help you see the problem, understand the problem, see it, you know, separately. So it's not just a forest of problems. It's split apart. So now we've got a failure here, but I mean, Visual Studio Code is showing me where the failures are. But again, you can just hit, and on the left you can see all the tests are failing as well. If I hit Control-Shift-B again to build this, so I've got this rig to build the TypeScript code, it will tell me where the problems are. So I can just double click, it'll take me to the line. And here all I want to do is, instead of one column name, I want an array of column names. So in this case, I want an array of one column name. And hopefully that's it. That should get me a passing tests again. But now I can reuse my code for creating my test data. I can reuse this in my third test down here. Except now what I want is not just one column name. I want to supply multiple column names. I've got task 1 here. And I've got task 2. Oops. So instead of passing that array or that literal array, I'm going to pass column names in. Now I can get rid of my original test data that I had there. This should give me the same result. I could dry this code a bit more. Don't repeat yourself is what try means. And say column 1 is equal to task 1. column 2 is equal to task 2, and then I just plug those variables in there, or I could plug them in just directly here, column name 1, column name 2, and then I can use my column names down here as well without having to have those hard-coded strings. Okay, so now that's a refactor for my test. I should get passing tests in Jest here. No, what have I done? Something's gone wrong. I've got one failing test. Let's just see what I can see here. Can load multiple columns. So it's this test that we're working on here. There is a problem with that. It's not. It looks like it's not getting task 2. If you guys out there are watching closely, you might see the problem already, but I don't see it. Maybe there's a problem here. That looks fine. What I might do here, this is a useful little technique. I'm going to print out my data. I'm going to see if the problem is in the generated markdown. Yeah, so that's really interesting. Children is coming through as empty. Why is that? What have I done? I'm just going to pull this data out here so I can do a console log on the column names that are going in. Why doesn't it look that? Oh, I spelled that wrong. And I got that wrong here as well. And so we've got task 1 and task 2 going in okay. Oh look, what I'm not seeing is what's in here. So that's actually what I want to see. It'd be nice if Jess could just print all that out for me, but I'm going to use JSON Stringify to print out the contents of that object so I can see what that looks like. So this is interesting. So here we've got the children that we've created in the test data. We've got task 1, we've got task 2. What the hell's going on here? So that looks fine. That markdown looks fine. It's going in there. I'm just going to console log the board data here just to see what that looks like while the tests are running. I'm going to jump to this function and just remind myself of how it's working. Let's just put some sort of marker in here so I know that I'm looking at the right thing. Oh, that's so weird. Like, what is it that's causing this? I've got 2 children, task 1 and task 2. These shouldn't actually be called tasks. They should actually be called, I don't know, like projects or something, or parts of a project. what I want to do here is I kind of want to go back to my original data and check that. So I'm gonna keep a copy of this. I'm gonna put that in a new Visual Studio window. So that's broken. There's something wrong with that. It doesn't match up to my original test data, and I just want to find out what that is. So I'm just undoing here, literally undoing until I get my test data back. Here I've got my test data, so let's copy that. And I'll redo just to get back where I wanted it. Let's full screen this, and this is the working data on the right. You can see there is an issue with the way I've structured this. I've put the map at the wrong place. That's the problem that I've created for myself here. And it's this top level children that I want to kind of write. So you can see that there's task 1 and there's task 2. Each one of these has a list. So I've got a fix that I need to make to my function here that creates the test data. So how am I going to do this? Basically, I need to have this whole thing passed in, and it might be better now to actually just go back to basics and make a JavaScript array to manage this. I'll just type it as an any in TypeScript so I can chuck anything in there. I'll do a for column name of column names, so a for loop over this list of column names. This was a little bit more tricky than I anticipated. I've got to push two things. This is actually the children. I'll call that children because it's not actually columns. It's children in the abstract syntax tree. One thing I'm pushing is this, which is what I had already anticipated. But each one of these at this level also needs a list of cards. I think this is the list of cards basically in the markdown format. So we need both of those things. And then that gets plugged in here. Oh, hang on, I'm missing something. I've got to take this whole thing here as well. This is definitely tricky. But fortunately, I've got my tests to tell me, whether this is going to work or not. There's an extra bracket there that I don't need. So I'm pushing the list, that's fine. I'm pushing the heading, and underneath it, it's got the text for it. And what I want to do here is plug the children in there. Actually, I need to make that an array of any. So that's one issue. I forgot to declare that. And oh yeah, I needed that closing paren there. I've got my semicolon in the wrong spot there. Okay. With a bit of luck, I might have some passing tests again now. This is some progress. Oh, there's still issues in my code that the compiler's pulling me up on. What have I done? Okay, so I've got to put curly brackets around this object here. So it's an object in an array. That got rid of a few of those errors. Oh, so it doesn't like these files here, but I don't need these files open anymore anyway. They're just untitled files. So that seems to be all the problems in my code sorted. There's no more problems here. I've got 4 passing tests, so whew, that's a win. Bit of an issue to have been solved there. I'm going to commit this now. So all I've got here, this is in SourceTree. All I've got here is a change to my tests, and you can scan through the code here. I'm running short on time, so but this all looks pretty good. It's always a good idea to kind of go and look at the diff for your code and make sure it's okay. But in this case, we've also got these sort of reliable automated tests to tell us that it's still working. So I've refactored these tests to use a helper function to produce the input data. I'm gonna push this code, so anyone who wants to run it can do that straight away. So that's all up on the GitHub repo right now. I'm going to start my npm watch again. Now, the other thing I wanted to do was refactor my TypeScript types. So, like when I started doing test-driven development for this function, I kind of didn't. I could have planned where it was going to end up, but I let the tests show me where it was going to end up, and so that my data that's coming out of it, which is a board data, is just an empty interface. So I don't actually have any types on this, and my board data here that I've got declared that I'm going to fill out in this function is just an any type in TypeScript. So that means it can be any JavaScript value, which is essentially as good as not having TypeScript. So this is what I want to change. I want to change this to board data. That's probably going to give me some errors. So it's definitely got an error there, but I'm just going to run my Control-Shift-B again to find the problems. Yep, so it's saying here, property lanes does not exist on iBoard data. So we're gonna type that, which means I need a lane. What are we going to call this? I'm going to call it. I'd like to call it a column in the Kanban board, but because we're working with React Trello and React Trello terminology is a lane, I'm going to call it that. So we'll call it lane data. And I'm going to say the board has an array of lanes. So that fixes that problem. That was the only problem I had there. I've got to type this as well. So you can see here I've declared my lane as type any. So again, that's just a regular JavaScript object that can have any kind of field or anything in it. So I want to type that properly. So that's what I want to be my lane data. And amazingly enough, that actually compiles with no problems. I was sure that was going to give me some errors down here. So that's definitely that. But what I want to do anyway is I want to kind of add the types. Can I use refactors to do this? No, it doesn't let me do what I want. But anyway, I can just add them directly here. So I've got ID, that's a string. Title, that's a string. Oh look, now it's giving me errors down here. It's saying things like, cards doesn't exist. So I don't know why it took a little while to catch up there. But now I need to actually put the cards in as well. So let's actually make a TypeScript interface for, if I can type properly, a TypeScript interface for iCard data. And again, I'd prefer to call this a task, but the React Trello terminology is that it's a card, and a lane has multiple cards. So that's an array of card datas. I'm gonna comment all this later. I'm not gonna do this live stream because it'll just be a bit boring. But I want to comment all these interfaces later. Now I've got some nice types in here now. This returns a board data. The data here that's building is a board data. We're adding lanes. I'm still got passing tests, so I know my code, even after these changes, I know my code is still working. And again, you know, this jest here, it's on automatic. So every time I save this, I just saved it then. I use the hotkey Control S, and it's running the tests again. So even though nothing changed, it's going to run the tests again. So I'm constantly aware of what's working and what isn't. So in this case, I'm committing, again, do a quick scan of the diff. There's not many changes there, just the typings. So added minimum TypeScript typings, the Kanban board data. Okay, now it's time to add some new tests. I'm just going to push that so the GitHub is up to date. I'll go back to my test file here. So I've got a bunch of tests down here that I want to write. These ones at least are going to be very similar to the tests that I've done. So I'm going to finish those right now, hopefully, and that will end today's session. So we'll start a new jest test here. This is going to be can load a task. Oh, I used the wrong function there. It's it. So we define a test suite using the describe function. So this defines the converter test suite, and then each test here is defined by the it function. This is the Mocha syntax. It's not really the default jest syntax, I don't think. But I come from a Mocha background. Mocha is another testing framework for JavaScript that I still use on a lot of my open source projects, even though my new projects tend to use Jest. Mocha is still very good. So do I want to use the same function? I'm not going to use it yet. What I'm going to do is I'm going to probably just hard code some data again, and then get it working, and then come back and refactor it just like I've done already. So what I want is one column. I'll just start my tests again in watch mode. I'm just going to console log the JSON stringified version of this thing here, because I just want to see what this looks like again, so I can get a working bit of hard-coded test data to use. You can see we've got 5 tests now because I've just added this empty test, and by default it's passing. So we've got a passing test there. But what I'm aiming to do with test-driven development is to create a I had some console logging here that I just want to get rid of. My aim with test-driven development in the first instance is to create a failing test and then implement the code that fixes the test. I'm just going to run this again because I just had a lot of data kind of spat out there, and then I was interrupted. Was it? Give me some test data. Here we go. So this here is my test data. Well, it's the start of my test data. It's not the complete thing, because I actually need to add some. What I'm going to do is put that there. I'll give it my usual name for test data. There we go. That's how you can quickly generate a nice little snippet of test data. But what I need to do here is I need to add some cards to this. Now, I'm actually going to go back to my... Where's my... I don't have it open. I'm going back to my prototype code, which I've just opened in Visual Studio Code. So I've got basically a demonstration or an example abstract syntax tree for Markdown here that I created in a previous episode of this live stream, that I can come and actually see what the format looks like. So you can see here we've got a list. Under it we've got a list item, and it's got some, like a paragraph and some text. So that's what represents a card or a task in the list. And I just want one of those. I'm only testing that I can get one card out of this. So where do I put that? I put that as the children of the list item here. I don't need everything here, so I'm going to get rid of some of this extraneous data that's like the position in the markdown file that this abstract syntax tree came from. I don't need that. I don't need that here. So that simplifies this test data a bit, so it's just a little bit easier to work with. I'll just call that task. So I have got some test data here. I'm just going to fold that down. And now the kind of stuff that I'm doing to test that is just the same as any other test really. So I'm just going to copy that as a base. So what am I testing? So I'm converting my test data, my markdown AST into the board data, and then I'm checking that my board data is equal to something that has got one lane. So my test data only has one lane, so I can get rid of that second lane there. I'm not even interested in the lane. This is going to be comparing too much of it. I'm really only interested that there is one lane and one card. So I'm going to expect first board data lanes dot length to be 1, and then I'm gonna pull out that one lane. So I pull that so I can run some expectations on that. I'm testing now that there is one card. Actually, I don't even need to do that. I can literally just test that cards is equal to. We can't use to be here, so to be is like it doesn't compare by value. It compares by identity. So you can't test that two arrays or two objects unless they're exactly the same, have the exactly the same identity. They're exactly the same object or array. To be is not going to work. So that's why we use to equal here. I'm looking for an array with one card, and what do I want from the card? I think what I want is an ID for it, which will make task the same as what we had in our test data up there, and title, which will make task. So there's more that can be added to a card, like the due date or people that it's assigned to, stuff like that. But I'm not worrying about that just yet. I'm just doing kind of I'm just adding the next smallest feature that I can, and then doing TDD to make sure that works. So it looks like I've got a compiler issue here. So Control-Shift-B and check the problems here. What have I done? I've missed a curly bracket there. So isn't it nice that Visual Studio Code and TypeScript, the TypeScript compiler, can find these problems for you? Like you can literally put some garbage here, and look, it's automatically come up with 4 problems, and it's showing you where they are. So it's lovely that it kind of points you to the problem. One of the advantages of using TypeScript. So I think that's all good. I'm going to get rid of my console logging that I added up here somewhere. Where was that? Can load a column. Yep, there it is there. So I'll get rid of that console logging just so it's not cluttering up my test output. I'll fold that down so I can get an overview of what this new test looks like. Now this should fail, so that's my prediction, is it's failing because I haven't implemented the code that parses the task. Actually, I think I'm going to leave it for that at this live stream. I usually want to try and keep these live streams to 30 minutes, and obviously we're going way over that. But this is a nice place to stop. It's one of the things that I like about test-driven development as well, is that you can basically, when you stop work for the day or for whatever, I'm only working on this project in small chunks while I'm live streaming, so I'm not going to touch this project again until next Friday probably. But what it means is that when I come back to this project and I rerun my tests, I know where to start. Like I've got an entry point to start working. Like I know what I was planning to do next. And also I've got my to-do list here. I'm implementing can load a task, so I'll take that off. But I'll come back to this next week. I've got a bunch of tests that I need to run through and create. I'll have to probably refactor tests again just to make sure it's nice and clean. The code, I mean. And then hopefully this is the cool stuff. Getting onto the editing tasks that you can actually kind of make a change, move a lane, move a task. Change the name of a lane, change the name of a task, and it will kind of wire that change into the Markdown abstract syntax tree, and then ultimately it's going to reserialize that abstract syntax tree back to the Markdown file without losing any user data. So thanks for joining me today. Join me again in another week. In the meantime, I might be doing a video or a live stream about Data Forge Notebook, so keep an eye out for that. I'll tweet about that. Please feel free to tweet at me on AshleyDavis75, and I'll catch you all online. Bye-bye.